Ex-husband and ex-wife's reunion turns into a tense showdown. What secret will they uncover now? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The room hummed with the low, polished chatter of a corporate celebration, the kind of event where every sparkle of a champagne flute felt rehearsed. Claire Whitmore hadn't planned to stand out. She had slipped into the back of the hall, letting the soft glow of warm lights blur the edges of her presence. But then she heard her name, spoken too loudly, too casually, rolling off Jason Hale's tongue like a challenge wrapped in charm. He stood on the stage, holding the microphone with the confidence of a man who believed the world still revolved around him. Guests turned, curious eyes shifting toward her as if on cue. Claire felt the spotlight wash over her, bright, clinical, unforgiving. The kind of light that didn't illuminate so much as expose. Jason smiled, the same practiced half-smile she used to mistake for warmth. "Everyone," he announced lightly, "I want you to meet someone very special from my past." The laughter that followed had no teeth, yet somehow it still stung. Claire inhaled slowly. The air smelled like citrus cologne, polished wood, and the faint electricity of a moment turning sharp. She kept her steps measured as she walked forward, her heels tapping against the marble floor, not rushed, not hesitant. Just controlled. Always controlled. As she approached the center of the room, memories flickered at the edges of her mind, brief, muted flashes. A hospital hallway. A ring left on a counter. A door closing behind a man who wouldn't even look back. She didn't let the images take over. She placed them where they belonged, in the quiet place she had built after everything fell apart. Jason leaned slightly toward her, microphone lowered now, his voice too soft for the crowd but loud enough for her to hear. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight, Claire. Brave of you to show up." He meant it as a jab dressed like a compliment. She didn't give him what he wanted. No flinch. No sharp inhale. Just the faintest lift of her brow, cool as winter light. Around them murmurs rippled, speculation, amusement, whispers carried on a current of curiosity. Claire didn't respond. Her silence was deliberate, steady, a poised line drawn between who she had been and who she was now. In that charged, suspended moment, her restraint became its own kind of power, quiet but unmistakable. And for the first time that evening, Jason's smile faltered, just slightly, as if he sensed something he couldn't quite name beginning to shift in the room. For a moment Claire let the room fade into a soft blur, the murmurs thinning as if distance had wrapped itself around her. Jason was still speaking to someone nearby, his voice bright with the performance he had perfected over years, but it no longer landed on her the way it once had. The light above her softened, and the noise of the event dissolved into a quiet hum inside her mind. A memory rose, uninvited but gentle this time, carrying her back to the months after everything had ended. She remembered the small apartment she had moved into on the west side of town, a place barely larger than a studio but filled with sunlight that stretched across the wooden floors every morning. She had chosen it for that light. She had needed something warm to learn to breathe in again. Back then, she would wake at 6 each morning, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the tiny kitchen. She would sit by the window, wrapped in a soft cotton sweater, watching the quiet street below come alive. Delivery trucks, dog walkers, the occasional jogger. Simple rhythms. Predictable. Safe. She had not been ready for noise, or crowds, or questions. Her world had shrunk to the size of a sketchbook on her lap and the pencil she rolled slowly between her fingers. Drawing had been the first thing that felt like hers again. She would sketch lines that trembled at first, then steadied with time. The shapes were simple. A cup on a table. A street light reflected in a puddle after rain. The curve of her own hand. Those drawings filled the walls piece by piece, becoming a map of her healing without her even realizing it. One evening, near the end of fall, she remembered walking into the small design studio that had taken a chance on her. The air had smelled like fresh paper and ink, and the gentle buzz of printers served as background music. She had felt nervous, unsure if she could rebuild anything of substance, but the owner had simply glanced at her portfolio and nodded with quiet certainty. "You see the world differently," he had said. "That is rare. That is worth something." It had been the first kind thing anyone had said to her in a long time, and it had lingered with her, warming the cold corners she kept hidden. Day by day, her life unfolded in small, steady steps. She learned how to design product labels, how to blend colors, how to balance a layout until it felt like a breath that fit perfectly in the chest. There were late evenings when she stayed after hours, music humming softly from an old speaker, her focus narrowing into the glow of her monitor. There were mornings when she walked to the studio with a sense of purpose she had forgotten she could feel. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she rebuilt herself. Not the woman Jason had known. Not the woman who had once waited for him to choose her. But someone quieter, stronger, anchored by things that could not be taken from her again. Standing in the present, in the middle of the gleaming event hall, Claire let that version of herself rise to the surface. It steadied her, carried her, wrapped around her like armor made of memory and hard-won peace. Jason's voice drifted closer again, but now it felt smaller, as if it belonged to a distant life she had already outgrown. Claire's thoughts snapped back to the present as she stood there, the warm glow of the ballroom flickering around her. Jason's words still hung in the air, but they felt like echoes now, too faint to reach her. His presence, once all-consuming, no longer commanded her attention. Instead, she focused on the faces around her, polished, and eager to be entertained by the drama of the night. But none of them truly saw her. None of them knew the story she carried with her, the one she had buried deep beneath layers of control. As she glanced around the room, her eyes caught sight of Evan Ross, standing near the edge of the crowd. He wasn't like the others. His gaze was steady, thoughtful, not consumed by the spectacle of it all. It was the kind of gaze that saw things clearly, perhaps even the things people worked hard to hide. He was there, waiting, calm in the midst of the chaos. His quiet presence seemed to invite her closer. Claire felt a sudden urge to leave the stage behind, to step away from the scene that was no longer hers. The room felt suffocating, the laughter and chatter a distant hum. She made her way toward Evan, her steps deliberate and calm. As she approached him, Evan's eyes flicked toward her, acknowledging her without a word. There was no need for pleasantries. They both understood the unspoken tension that existed in the air. "Shall we get out of here?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, like a balm to the discomfort that had taken root in her chest. Claire nodded. Without looking back at Jason or the crowd, she turned, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she walked with Evan toward the exit. The outside air hit them as they stepped into the cool night, the noise of the ballroom falling away behind them. For the first time that evening, Claire allowed herself to take a deep breath, the weight of the last few hours lifting from her shoulders. She felt the familiar tension in her chest ease, replaced by the quiet, steady presence of someone who wasn't trying to force her into a role. Evan didn't speak at first. He simply led her to a quiet corner of the courtyard, where a bench overlooked a small garden. The world felt distant here, away from the bright lights, away from the eyes that constantly watched. Claire sat down, the coolness of the bench against her skin a welcome contrast to the heat of the ballroom. Evan took a seat beside her, still silent, but his presence was no longer overwhelming. It was a comfort, a steadying force. "You don't have to do anything tonight," he said finally, his voice cutting through the stillness. "You don't owe anyone a performance." Claire looked at him, her gaze steady. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to let the layers of control slip away, just a little. "I know," she said. Softly. The words felt lighter than they had in years. They both sat in the silence for a few moments, the air between them filled with a kind of understanding. Here, in the quiet, she was no longer the woman she had once been, the one defined by someone else's expectations. She was simply Claire, sitting beside someone who saw her, not the version Jason had once known, but the version that had come through everything stronger, quieter, and perhaps a little more whole. The evening air was cool and crisp, and for a moment Claire just sat there, letting the stillness settle over her. The world beyond the garden was bustling, but here, in this small, quiet corner, it felt like time had slowed down. Evan sat next to her, his presence steady and unassuming, not demanding her attention but offering it if she needed it. It had been a long time since Claire had experienced such peace, a moment where there was no rush, no pressure to be anything other than herself. She glanced at Evan, noting the way his eyes lingered on the garden, as if lost in thought. He had not pried, had not asked her anything she wasn't ready to share. And that, more than anything, was what made this moment feel safe. "You've come a long way," Evan said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Claire's gaze shifted to him, and she nodded slowly. She knew what he meant. The path she had taken was far from easy, but each step had brought her to this place, this moment where she could breathe, where she could finally see herself clearly. "It hasn't been easy," Claire replied, her voice soft but steady. "But I think I'm getting there. I'm starting to understand who I am without him." There was no need to say Jason's name. Evan understood. The weight of her words hung in the air for a moment before Evan spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You've always been strong, Claire. You just needed to remember that." His words were simple, but they struck something deep inside her. She had spent so long burying that strength, trying to be something else, someone who could fit into the mold Jason had once tried to shape for her. But now, she was learning to let go of that version of herself, to embrace the woman she was becoming. "I've spent a lot of time pretending," Claire said, her voice almost a whisper. "Pretending to be okay, pretending to be someone I wasn't. But I can't keep pretending anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone." She let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the confession lift from her shoulders. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped being the woman Jason had known. She had stopped trying to live up to his expectations, and for the first time, she could see the road ahead of her clearly. Evan gave her a small, understanding smile. "I think that's the first step," he said, his voice warm with sincerity. Claire returned his smile, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was a quiet kind of victory, the kind that came from reclaiming yourself. The kind of victory that wasn't about proving something to someone else, but about proving something to yourself. The sound of distant laughter and music drifted from the ballroom, a stark contrast to the stillness of the courtyard. For a moment, Claire felt torn between the world she had left behind and the one she was stepping into. But then she looked at Evan, and she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the woman who had been defined by Jason's approval. She was Claire, and that was enough. "Shall we go back?" Evan asked, his voice gentle, offering her the choice. Claire looked at him, her expression soft but resolute. "Not yet," she said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "Not just yet." And for the first time in a long while, Claire felt that it was okay to be exactly where she was. She wasn't rushing to leave or to move on. She was simply here, in this moment, reclaiming herself piece by piece. The cool breeze continued to flow through the courtyard, the rustling of the leaves creating a soft, almost soothing melody. Claire felt her body relax into the bench, the weight of the evening finally lifting from her shoulders. The stars above were sharp and clear, as if they too were witnessing this quiet moment, this shift in her life. She wasn't sure how long they sat there, the silence between her and Evan comfortable, a shared understanding without the need for words. But eventually the sound of footsteps broke the tranquility. The click of heels on the stone path announcing the arrival of someone else. Claire looked up, her gaze steady, expecting the usual crowd of guests from the event. But instead, she saw someone she had not expected, Jason. His tall frame loomed against the backdrop of the ballroom, his posture stiff, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't quite the same as before. There was a moment of hesitation between them, a silent conversation that passed through the air, unspoken but understood. Jason stood a few feet away, his gaze lingering on Claire. His usual smirk, the one that always made her feel small, was absent. Instead, there was something else, something close to regret, or perhaps realization. "Claire," he said, his voice softer than she remembered, quieter. It was almost as if he wasn't sure what to say. "You look different," he added, the words awkward in his mouth. Claire didn't respond right away. She just watched him, the man who had once been the center of her world. The man who had, for too long, defined her existence in ways that she had now started to unpick. She could feel Evan's presence beside her, still steady, still unspoken, but there. It was clear that Jason's intrusion didn't unsettle him. Jason took a step forward, glancing at Evan then back at Claire. I didn't expect this," he continued, his words slow and careful. Claire felt the familiar pull in her chest, the urge to reply, to defend herself, to explain herself. But she didn't. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. The version of herself that Jason had known no longer existed. The woman sitting beside Evan was someone he could never fully understand, someone who had walked through the fire and come out unscathed. "You didn't expect what?" Claire finally asked, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it now, a confidence that hadn't been there before. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it again. He seemed unsure of how to proceed, the walls he had built around himself suddenly feeling fragile. "I didn't expect you to be this strong," he said quietly, as if the words themselves were foreign to him. Claire tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Strength isn't something you expect from people, Jason," she replied, her voice low but firm. "It's something they have to find on their own." Jason stood still for a moment, as if weighing her words, but in the end, there was nothing more to say. He simply turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Claire watched him go, but she didn't feel the same ache she had once felt when he left her. She didn't feel the weight of his departure. Instead, she felt a quiet pride in who she had become. Turning her attention back to Evan, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "For being here." Evan nodded, his smile soft but warm. "Any time, Claire." And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the night and the fading sounds of the party, Claire knew she was no longer a woman defined by her past. She was free to be whoever she wanted to be, free to create the future she had long ago stopped believing in. The future she was now building, step by step. The night stretched on, and the sounds from the ballroom had faded into a soft hum in the distance. Claire sat quietly on the bench, the weight of everything that had happened beginning to settle within her. She was still processing everything. Her confrontation with Jason, the way he had looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time in years. It was strange, that feeling of being looked at like she was someone new. But it wasn't just his perception of her that had changed. It was her own. For the first time, Claire felt truly free. Free from the expectations, free from the past, and free from the memories that had once haunted her. She turned to Evan, who had remained by her side, his presence steady and quiet. His gaze met hers, and for a moment either of them spoke. There was no need for words. In this space, they both understood what needed to be understood. Claire had reclaimed herself. She wasn't the broken woman she had been. She was someone else now, someone whole, someone who had found strength in places she never thought to look. "You don't have to say anything," Evan said, his voice breaking the silence. "But I think you know now. You've made it." Claire nodded slowly. The weight of his words settled over her like a blanket, warm and comforting. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever it was, she could face it. She was ready. "I've been afraid of being alone for so long," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "But now I realize I've been alone in the wrong way. I thought I needed someone else to be whole. But I was wrong." Evan smiled softly, his expression gentle. "You've always been whole, Claire. You just needed to see it for yourself." She met his gaze, feeling the sincerity in his words. It wasn't just a compliment. It was the truth. She had spent so much of her life seeking validation from the wrong places, from the wrong people. But now, she didn't need anyone's approval. Not Jason's, not anyone's. She had everything she needed within herself. "I'm not the person I was before," Claire said, her voice steady. "And I'm okay with that." Evan nodded, as if he had always known. "You don't need to be. Not for anyone." The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, but Claire didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The stars above her seemed to shine brighter, and the world felt more open, more full of possibilities. She didn't know what would happen next. But for once, she wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of being herself, of stepping into the unknown. She was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time, Claire felt like she was finally living, not in the shadows of her past, but in the light of her own truth. The night air had cooled even further, but Claire didn't mind. She sat next to Evan, the quiet hum of the event in the background fading more and more as they drifted further from the crowd. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on the ground. There was something comforting about the stillness, the way the world seemed to pause for just a moment. Claire felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't running anymore. Not from her past. Not from herself. She was standing still, firmly planted in the present, with nothing but the future ahead of her. "I think I'm starting to understand what it means to let go," Claire said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Evan looked at her, his expression thoughtful, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened. "For so long, I held on to everything. The memories, the mistakes, the things I couldn't change. But now, I realize I've been holding on to the wrong things." Claire's words hung in the air, and for a moment she just sat with them, allowing them to settle. She wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't trying to explain herself or justify her decisions. She had come to understand that she didn't need to. "Letting go isn't easy," she continued, her eyes fixed on the dark sky above. "It's not something you just wake up and decide to do. It's more like a slow shift. A realization that you've carried something for too long, and now it's time to release it." Evan didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. His presence beside her was enough. It was the kind of support that didn't demand anything in return, the kind that simply allowed her to be. "Do you think it's possible to start over?" Claire asked, her voice tentative, but there was a quiet strength behind it. "To really start over, without all the baggage from the past weighing you down?" Evan's gaze softened as he turned to her. "I think it's more than possible," he said, his voice calm, but sure. "But you have to believe it. You have to believe that you're worthy of a fresh start, that you can build something new without carrying the old with you." Claire turned her head to look at him, the sincerity in his eyes striking a chord deep within her. She had never really allowed herself to believe that. Not completely. But now, as she sat there, she could feel something shifting inside her. Maybe it wasn't about starting over completely. Maybe it was about building something new, something that wasn't defined by her past mistakes or the expectations others had placed on her. It was about defining herself on her own terms. "I think I'm ready for that," Claire said finally, her voice steady, full of quiet confidence. She had spent so long questioning herself, wondering if she was enough. But now, for the first time in years, she felt the weight of those doubts lifting. "I'm ready to let go of what no longer serves me," she added. Evan nodded, his expression warm with approval. "You already have," he said. And Claire realized that he was right. She had already begun to let go. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that had started long before this night, long before she even realized it. She had started to let go of the past, piece by piece, until it no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman trapped by old memories. She was someone new, someone who could look forward with hope and purpose. "Thank you, Evan," Claire said, her voice full of gratitude. "For being here, for helping me see this." Evan smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. You did the hard part, Claire. You've always had everything you needed inside you. And as she sat there, with the night sky stretching endlessly above her, Claire realized that he was right. She had always had it. The strength, the resilience, the courage to start again. And now, she was finally ready to live the life she had always wanted, one where she could be true to herself, free from the chains of her past. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, but Claire didn't mind. The stillness was exactly what she needed, the quiet of the courtyard wrapping around her like a warm, familiar blanket. The sounds from inside the ballroom faded into the distance, and she was left with only the faint rustling of the trees and the soft hum of her own thoughts. She had spent so long trying to escape her past, trying to outrun the mistakes and the people who had shaped her life. But now, for the first time, she felt free. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing still, right where she needed to be. With Evan by her side, Claire finally understood that she didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. She didn't need to be validated by the people from her past, not by Jason or anyone else. She was enough, just as she was. It was a truth that had taken her years to accept, but now it was clear to her. Evan sat next to her, quiet but present, allowing her the space she needed. She could feel his gaze on her, steady and supportive, but not overwhelming. He wasn't pushing her to talk or to do anything. He was simply there, and that was all she needed. For a while they sat in silence, the kind of silence that was comfortable, not forced. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that said, "I see you, and I'm here." Claire turned to him, her eyes soft, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything. For being here. For showing me what it means to be free." Evan looked at her, his expression warm and kind. "You did all the hard work, Claire," he replied. "I'm just here to walk with you, that's all." Claire nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had done the work, but having Evan by her side made it feel lighter, easier somehow. He had shown her that it was possible to move forward, to heal, and to live without carrying the burden of her past. She didn't need to hold on to it anymore. As they sat there together, Claire felt a new sense of possibility growing inside her. The world seemed wide open, full of potential, full of new beginnings. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of the unknown, of the changes that were coming. She was ready for them. For the first time, Claire realized that she was no longer defined by what had happened to her. She was not defined by her relationship with Jason or by the mistakes she had made. She was defined by the woman she was becoming, by the strength she had found within herself. And as she sat there with Evan, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. She was ready to build the life she had always wanted, a life where she could be true to herself, where she could stand on her own 2 feet and embrace the future with open arms. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the courtyard as Claire sat silently, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She had come so far, and yet there was still so much to explore, so much to discover about herself and the world around her. She had never imagined that one night, one moment, could change everything. The woman she had been, the one who had walked through life afraid and uncertain, was no longer there. In her place was a woman who had found her strength, who had learned to embrace her own worth. Evan sat beside her, his quiet presence a comforting reminder of how far she had come. They didn't need to speak, the connection between them was enough. It was the kind of bond that didn't require words, just understanding. For the first time, Claire felt like she wasn't alone, that she didn't need anyone else to fill the emptiness she had carried for so long. The past was behind her, and the future was waiting. As they sat there together, Claire realized that she was no longer held captive by her own doubts. She wasn't defined by her mistakes, or the people who had tried to shape her. She was defined by the woman she had chosen to become. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. She was ready to embrace it all, every challenge, every triumph, and everything in between. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. Evan turned to her, his expression kind but unreadable, as if he had known all along what she was about to say. "You didn't have to do this alone," he replied, his voice steady, like the calm in the storm. Claire nodded, her gaze turning toward the distant horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. She could see the future now, a future that was hers to shape, hers to build. "I know," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The night had been long, but it had given her the clarity she needed. The journey she had started was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She wasn't running from it. She was walking toward it, with confidence, with hope. The woman who had once been lost had found her way, and now, she could finally live for herself. "Let's go," Claire said after a moment, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Let's see where this road takes us." Evan didn't say a word. He simply nodded, standing up and offering her his hand. She took it without hesitation, knowing that whatever happened next, she would face it with courage and grace. Together, they walked toward the future, side by side, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as equals, ready to build a life that was their own.